Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the House's third annual JEDx.
After working with a startup in Silicon Valley, Mike founded Wealthsimple in 2014, and it has become Canada's fastest growing online investment manager. He has been called an industry mover by the Financial Post and a change agent by Canadian Business Magazine. Accomplishing all of this by the age of 27 is pretty remarkable, but what I think is even more amazing is that I get to call him a friend. Please join me in welcoming one of my closest friends and one of the smartest guys I know, Mike Katchen.
I have to start by saying I feel like I really shouldn't be up here. I'm a 27-year-old kid, just like Rabbi Lipner said, and I've got way more questions than I do answers. So rather than spend, the next few minutes trying to share any wisdom or, deep insights that have been accumulated over decades of experience, I thought instead I'd share some of the really big questions that are on my mind. Some of the experiences I've had over the last couple years where I have compromised or, ended up not compromising on my values, and I hope, sharing my experience is something that many of you can relate to. And these are some really, really tough questions. So I hope that we can help figure this out together, ideally. That was Rabbi Lipner's favorite slide. So as many of you know, about a year ago I founded a company called Wealthsimple. And our mission is to make really high-quality investment services accessible, transparent, and low cost for everybody. And that's a really big mission in an industry that, frankly, hasn't changed that much in 30 years. And we feel really passionately about it. And one of the things I spend a lot of my time on, in particular over the last 3 months, has been on defining our company's values and vision. These are a few of them. We're actually turning them into posters and trying to post them on the walls of the office. And one of the reasons is we've been really fortunate that just 9 months after launching, we've been quite successful. And one of the fears we have is that as we grow the team from what was only one person when I started it 9 months ago to 15 today to what we expect to be 30 by the end of this year, we're going to get further and further away from the values that defined us when we started the company. So we're trying to spend a lot of time up front getting this right, really baking it into the DNA of what we do so that as we scale, we don't compromise on the things we stand for. And so I had this really interesting experience because the timing for the invitation to come and speak tonight came at a really interesting time for me. Here I am spending all of this energy trying to define my company's values. And I'm struck with this thought that when's the last time I really sat down and thought about my values as an individual? Right? It was probably in Rabbi Lipner's class when I was in chat over 10 years ago now. And if a company risks losing its way and not really growing into the company that you aspire it to be over time, like how much more so for individuals like you and me if we're not really clear about our values and aspirations along the way. So I thought that was a really interesting just thought that struck me. And what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is just share some of the things that I've been reflecting on as I've been preparing for tonight, and 3 ideas in particular. The first is, I think it's really important to be deliberate. We all have a set of implicit values that guide the way we make decisions every day, but it's very rare for us to sit down and truly make them explicit. And I think, that's dangerous, because what you don't want to happen is for 20 years to go by and for you to look back at your life and find that you've grown up to be the person you never aspired to be. You don't have the character and values that were really important to you if you were to, sit out and plan what is the person that I could be someday or dream to be someday. And I think this is a really hard thing to do. And I found it really helpful as I sat down over the last couple of weeks to try and think about this, a little bit more of a tactical sort of way. So, 3 categories of values. We got our personal values, what we do, personally in our personal lives with our family and friends. We got our community values. We got our professional values. And I think it's really important to think about how each of these areas fit into our lives. And sometimes they, can relate to each other. Sometimes they can actually conflict with each other. But I'm not going to spend any time on that. I thought I'd tell a story about a really interesting professional values kind of scenario I found myself in about a year ago. I've been working on Wealthsimple for the better part of 3 years. And while I was down in California, I was spending my nights and weekends on this business and this big dream of trying to transform investments and make it really accessible for everybody. And I'd been working a long time on building up the courage to finally take the big step and finally become an entrepreneur. And finally, the big day came, and I went into my boss's office to quit. I was working at Ancestry.com in San Francisco at the time. And I said to my boss, I'm going to quit. I'm going to move back to Canada. I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to try and build this great business. I have this dream of what it could be. And he said, well, that's dumb. You're a 25-year-old kid at the time. You got a lot more to learn before you can actually go out there and try and build something like this on your own. And in fact, we're looking for someone to go out and lead the Canadian business for us. Why don't we give you a shot? This will be a great resume building opportunity for you. It's a really safe way for you to move back to Canada. And you're going to learn a lot of the skills that you're going to need to be successful in business later on. And despite the fact that I'd spent all this time over the last 3 years getting excited, getting myself ready to finally go out and be an entrepreneur, I made a mistake, and I took the job. And I was lucky that about 3 weeks into the job, I realized how big of a mistake I made. And I quit Ancestry, which another conversation unto itself. And I quit Ancestry to finally start Wealthsimple. And it's amazing to me, the sense of relief, the sense of fulfillment I had day one when I was finally able, to breathe and pursue this passion of mine that I'd been working on so long on the sidelines and wasn't really compromising on that aspiration, any longer. So that's the first kind of reflection I had, that there's a lot of push and pull that we go through, especially as young people in our careers. And often we have these dreams of the things that we'd like to be doing, but maybe we wait a few more years to actually pursue them. There's a few more experiences or things we want to learn along the way. I don't think those questions or those choices ever get easier. And so one thing that I've had, the good fortune of an experience is, if you have those dreams, if you have those aspirations, if you have a set of values that's telling you you've got to go do something, do it. I can't tell you how fulfilling it is to be on the other end and actually pursuing those things. The second kind of reflection I had as I was preparing for tonight was, you got to surround yourself with great people, people that keep you honest. These are really tough questions, and it's really easy to make all sorts of mistakes along the way. And I found it really helpful to have, a life partner, recently got engaged. Thank you. A family, friends, and colleagues at work that I do think push me to be the best me possible. And one story in particular, about where I actually compromised on my values, and it was because of Nikki, my fiance, where I was able to get back on track, and why it's important to surround yourself with these sorts of people. So when I first moved down to California to join a startup down there called 1,000 Memories, my first role was trying to define, what is the market that we're going after? And we had a great product, but we didn't really know who our users or our clients were going to be. So I did a lot of survey work up front to try and figure out, who would be interested in the sort of work that we were doing. And I used this great tool where you got to commission a survey, you get to pick who your respondents you wanted to be, and a day later you'd have your results. So I set the survey up, I clicked go. About 10 minutes later I realized I forgot to filter out any non-North American results. This was only really relevant if it was North American respondents for us. And though it had only been 10 minutes between when I clicked submit and actually, went in to cancel the survey, over 500 people in India completed the survey. And we were a startup. You had to pay for these results. I think it was about $500 if I was going to go through with the commission. And I had this choice. Either I pay $500, startup doesn't really have much in the way of resources, or I reject all the surveys, which according to the terms of the platform we were using, totally kosher. According to what you'd think like a good business investment would be, like totally kosher. We didn't want those surveys. It was totally unintentional. It doesn't really make sense for the company to pay for that sort of a thing. And so I rejected the surveys. Didn't think much about it, went home. Was Skyping, I was in San Francisco at the time, so I was Skyping with my now fiance. And I was telling her about this like silly little thing I did at work that day, right? This stupid mistake I made where I accidentally got 500 people in India to fill out the survey for us. And I canceled it so everything was okay. And her response was, how could you possibly do that? You set up a job, people did the job, and you don't know, but people really invested in $1 for people in India. That could be a whole lot of money. Like, you made a mistake. You got to own up to that. Which is not at all the response I thought she was going to say. So, of course she was right, and I went in and I actually, the company was not going to sponsor it, and I paid $500 out of pocket to these 500 people in India that I'll never meet, because I thought it was the right thing to do. But the only reason I thought it was the right thing to do was because there was someone there to catch me. If she hadn't said that to me that night, I never would have given it a second of thought. And it would have been really easy for me to forget about that experience. But it was actually a pretty profound one that shaped my thinking around business partnerships, working with suppliers, the importance of going like a step further whenever there's questions around values, to make sure that you're always on the right side. It's always important to do the right thing in the way that you're dealing in business. The third reflection I share is it's really important to hold yourself accountable. I love this cartoon. I don't know if you guys can read it. But for me, this is the question around, read it to you. So the guy on the left says, you've got a problem with avoiding personal accountability. The guy on the right says, yeah, and whose fault is that? This question around holding yourself accountable to me is all about, what do you do when you don't have that person that's there to catch you? What do you do when you're home alone, nobody's watching, to live up to your values, live up to the person that you're aspiring to be? And to me, a lot of this is driven by my Jewish values. And I'm someone that loves Hasidic stories. Okay? I remember from high school, that's where my love of this stuff got born. And there's a very famous one about a rabbi named Reb Zusha. Some people may have heard me talk about Reb Zusha in the past. So the story goes like this. Reb Zusha's on his deathbed, and he's crying. And his students come and find him this way, and they ask, Reb Zusha, why are you crying? And he says, I'm crying because I'm afraid of death. And the students say to Zusha, how is it that you, someone who everybody, of our time says is just like Moshe Rabbeinu, just like Moses, could be afraid of death? When you die, you're going to go straight to heaven, welcome with open arms. And Zusha says, I'm not afraid that when I die, I'll go to heaven, and they'll say, Zusha, why weren't you more like Moshe Rabbeinu? I'm afraid that I'm going to go to heaven, and they're going to say, Zusha, why weren't you more like Zusha? And to me, this is like a really powerful concept of one of the greatest sages of all times, like a great Hasidic master, who objectively at the time was considered, just one of the sages of the era, could still say, I wasn't living up to my potential. Despite the fact that I was being compared to someone like Moses, I wasn't being the best that I could possibly be. And I think that's a really powerful message, because you and me, we are the only people that know if we're living up to what we think we're capable of. And this is a really hard question to answer, but I think it's a really important one to ask yourself, is, especially when no one's watching, are you doing everything that you can to turn into the person that you aspire to be over time? So just to recap, and again, these are just reflections, but I think, one, it's really important to be deliberate. You got to know where you're going, you got to know what your aspirations are, and you got to know what your values are. And I think it's really important to make those explicit, not just implicit. Two is surround yourself with people that can keep you honest. And that can be life partners, friends, family, colleagues, whatever it is. It's really easy to make mistakes, and it's super helpful to have the right people around you to keep you honest. And three is you got to hold yourself accountable. And I'd leave you with one last thought, which is this beautiful quote from Pirkei Avot, that we're not obligated to complete the task, but neither are we exempt from trying. This idea that this stuff is really hard. It's really hard. And as I said at the start, I don't have any of the answers. But I think it's really important for us to try. And I think in particular, many of us are young professionals. We're just getting started with our lives, our careers. And this is the time to think about it. We don't want to find ourselves 10, 20, 30 years from now looking back and realizing that we've grown into people that we never intended to be. And it's much better to answer these questions, or at least start thinking about these questions up front. And I think, if there was a better time of year, Shavuot is next week, which is, the holiday where the Jewish people celebrate getting the Torah, which is really our book of ethics. And so if there was any time, to really start asking yourself, what is your set of values? What is the person that you aspire to be? And how are you going to get there? I think, this is a really wonderful time of year to start doing that. So my hope to all of you is, to join me in this journey, and maybe we can help each other figure it out. And thank you so much for having me.